Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to an era when messages soared on feathered wings, imbued with more than just words. Imagine, if you will, the soft cooing of a pigeon, not outside your window, but perched on the shoulder of a Roman dignitary, its feathers ever so slightly scented with exotic oils. You're there, in the bustling heart of ancient Rome, amidst the clamor of the Forum, and suddenly a small, gray bird descends, landing with an almost imperceptible flutter. This isn't just any bird. It's a living, breathing, exquisitely perfumed telegraph, carrying secrets of state or whispered intimacies from across the vast empire. It's a world where news traveled not by lightning-fast fiber optics, but by muscle, instinct, and a dash of olfactory intrigue. You probably won't survive a single day in ancient Rome without a serious pigeon-related incident. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might be thinking, pigeons? Really? But long before WhatsApp or even Pony Express, pigeons were the original instant messengers of the ancient world. They were, in essence, the earliest known postal service with wings. It wasn't just a quirky Roman habit. It was a practical, surprisingly reliable method of conveying information, especially over distances where human couriers might be too slow or too vulnerable. The story of the pigeon's role in human communication stretches back far, far before Rome, to civilizations like the Egyptians and the Persians. Think of it, a small, unassuming bird, possessing an innate homing ability that's still a bit of a marvel, even to modern science. The Romans, ever the pragmatists and innovators, simply adopted and refined this pre-existing avian technology. The earliest documented uses of carrier pigeons by the Romans often revolved around military matters. Imagine a general, miles from the capital, needing to send urgent news of a victory or, less happily, a defeat. A pigeon, released from the battlefield, would make its way back to its home loft, carrying a tiny scroll tied to its leg. This scroll would contain the crucial intelligence, potentially influencing the course of an entire campaign. It was a tactical advantage, a way to bypass slow human couriers who might be intercepted by enemies or delayed by rough terrain. This was a mainstream historical fact, the military pigeon post, a vital part of ancient warfare. But it wasn't just about battles and sieges. As the empire grew, so did the need for rapid communication beyond the battlefield. You see, while Roman roads were impressive, and their human couriers, the tabellarii, were famously efficient, they still had their limits. A pigeon, cutting through the air, could often outpace a man on horseback, especially if the terrain was difficult or if the message needed to travel directly over obstacles. This speed was invaluable for an empire that stretched from the chilly mists of Britannia to the scorching deserts of North Africa. Imagine waiting weeks, maybe even months, for news from a distant province. With pigeons, that wait could be reduced to days. Now, for a quirky tidbit, did you know that some historians believe the Romans might have even used different colored pigeons for different types of messages? Perhaps a white pigeon for good news, a black one for bad, or even a red one for urgent military alerts. It's a fascinating, if unproven, theory, suggesting a level of sophistication in their avian communication system that goes beyond simple delivery. It hints at a visual shorthand, a way to convey an immediate emotional context even before the message was unrolled. While this remains in the realm of intriguing speculation, it certainly makes you ponder the depth of their ingenuity. Historians still argue whether the Roman pigeon post was truly a centralized, imperial system with dedicated pigeon lofts and handlers, or if it was more ad hoc, relying on private citizens or military units keeping their own birds. Was there a network of pigeon post offices across the empire, or was it a more informal arrangement? The evidence is fragmented, as is often the case with the minutiae of daily life in ancient times. But what is clear is that these birds were far more than just common city dwellers. They were integral, if unassuming, cogs in the vast machinery of Roman administration and daily life. You can almost hear the flutter of their wings, carrying whispers of history across the millennia. As the Roman Empire expanded, so too did the sophistication of its communication methods. You might imagine these early military pigeons as rugged, no-nonsense birds, purely functional. But soon, the emperors themselves, those masters of grand gestures and intricate administration, began to see the potential for these feathered couriers beyond mere battle reports. This wasn't just about sending a quick "we won" message. It was about the nuanced art of imperial communication, a way for the most powerful man in the world to reach out swiftly and discreetly across vast distances. Imagine being Emperor Augustus, pondering a crucial decision in Rome and needing immediate updates from a distant governor. Waiting weeks for a courier felt like an eternity. This shift marked a fascinating evolution. The pigeons weren't just war tools anymore. They were becoming instruments of governance, of personal connection, and even of intrigue. While traditional human couriers, like the cursus publicus, the Roman Imperial Postal Service, handled official dispatches, decrees, and heavy correspondence, they were, by their very nature, slower and more susceptible to delays. A wagon train or even a fast rider could be hampered by bad weather, treacherous roads, or, heaven forbid, a sudden outbreak of highwaymen. A pigeon, however, soared above it all, literally. The imperial adoption of pigeons elevated their status. These birds were no longer just common homing pigeons. They were becoming imperial assets. You can almost picture them, preening in their specialized lofts, perhaps receiving a better grade of grain than your average Roman citizen. This wasn't necessarily about sending encyclopedias of information. It was about brevity and urgency. A short message, a critical order, a personal greeting from the emperor himself, these were the ideal payloads for a pigeon. Think of it as the original TLDR, too long, didn't read, for the Roman elite, a distilled essence of vital information. A quirky detail here, it's rumored that some emperors even had favorite pigeons, birds known for their exceptional speed or reliability. Imagine Julius Caesar, ever the pragmatist, personally selecting a particularly swift bird before sending it off with a crucial directive. While this might be more legend than documented fact, it speaks to the personal investment and trust placed in these small, feathered messengers. It also adds a touch of charm to the often stern image of Roman leadership. You might even find yourself chuckling at the thought of an emperor having a favorite bird when he had legions at his command. Historians still argue whether the training of these imperial pigeons was done by specialized state-employed ornithologists, if such a term existed then, or if it was more of a decentralized process, perhaps handled by military officers or even trusted slaves with a knack for bird handling. The details of how the empire standardized or managed its pigeon fleet are surprisingly scarce, considering their apparent importance. Did they have dedicated pigeon masters in every major city? Or did they rely on local expertise? The logistics are murky, but the outcome was clear. Messages flew. It's worth noting that the Roman Empire was built on communication. Control over vast territories required not just military might, but also effective information flow. The faster the emperor knew about a rebellion in Gaul or a famine in Egypt, the faster he could react. The pigeons provided that crucial edge, a way to cut through the bureaucratic delays inherent in a land-based postal system. So, while you might think of the Roman Empire in terms of mighty legions and grand aqueducts, remember the humble pigeon, silently playing its part in maintaining the empire's vast network. They were the unsung heroes of rapid communication, delivering whispers of power through the ancient skies. So we've established that Roman emperors loved their swift, feathered messengers. But here's where it gets truly interesting, and perhaps a little bit luxurious. These weren't just any messages. Some of them were perfumed. Imagine a tiny scroll, not just with critical text, but emanating a delicate scent, perhaps a whiff of exotic frankincense, a hint of myrrh, or even the subtle aroma of a rare floral oil. This wasn't just for pleasantness. It was a layer of sophistication, a subtle indicator of the message's origin, its importance, or even its intended recipient. You see, in a world without digital signatures or encrypted emails, how do you verify the authenticity of a message, especially one traveling by bird? A specific, known scent could act as an imperial seal, a unique identifier that immediately distinguished a genuine dispatch from a clever forgery. It added an almost ceremonial gravitas to the message, signaling that this was not just a hurried note, but something truly significant, directly from the emperor's person or his inner circle. Think of it as ancient two-factor authentication, but instead of a code on your phone, it's a scent on a bird's leg. This practice also speaks to the Roman fascination with luxury and aesthetics. Perfumes and incense were not just for personal adornment. They were integral to religious rituals, social gatherings, and even daily life. To imbue a message with a specific fragrance was to elevate it, to make it memorable, and to convey a certain message about the sender's status and taste. It's a quirky detail, but it paints a vivid picture of a culture that appreciated sensory details, even in its most practical endeavors. Imagine the reaction of a recipient. Not only did they get the news, but the very air around the message transformed, carrying a fragrant whisper from Rome. This isn't to say every pigeon message was perfumed. That would have been excessive, and probably quite a bother for the pigeon handlers. It was likely reserved for the most sensitive communiques, the ones that required an undeniable mark of imperial origin. Perhaps a secret order to a distant legion, a delicate political instruction, or even a personal note to a trusted confidant. The very act of applying the perfume would have been a deliberate, almost ritualistic step, signifying the importance of the information being entrusted to the bird. A mainstream historical fact concerning Roman communication is their extensive use of wax tablets. Messages could be scratched onto these reusable tablets, which were then often bound together. For more formal or permanent records, papyrus scrolls were used. These methods were robust, but lacked the speed of the pigeon. The perfumed pigeon, then, existed in a niche, a kind of express, high-security mail service, designed for critical, time-sensitive information where authenticity needed to be immediately apparent without complex deciphering. Historians still argue whether the type of perfume used was always unique to a particular emperor, or if certain scents were tied to specific types of messages or even specific imperial departments. Was there an edict of cedarwood or a diplomatic rosewater? The evidence is scarce, relying mostly on poetic allusions or fragmented accounts. It's hard to tell if this was a deeply codified system or simply a matter of imperial preference and available luxury goods. But the very idea of scented messages makes the ancient world feel a little less dusty and a lot more, well, fragrant. You can almost smell the history. Now, how do you get a bird, no matter how instinctively gifted, to reliably carry perfumed secrets across vast distances? The answer, my sleepy friend, lies in the meticulous and rather ingenious art of pigeon training. This wasn't a casual hobby. It was a serious endeavor, demanding patience, consistency, and a deep understanding of avian behavior. You couldn't just grab any bird from the forum and expect it to become an imperial courier. Oh no, that would be like expecting your house cat to deliver your mail, charming in theory, chaotic in practice. The fundamental principle behind carrier pigeons, then as now, is their homing instinct. Pigeons, particularly certain breeds, possess an incredible innate ability to find their way back to their home loft, often over hundreds of miles, even through unfamiliar territory. The Roman trainers didn't teach them this instinct, but rather harnessed it. Imagine a Roman trainer, perhaps a grizzled veteran with sun-weathered hands and a surprisingly gentle touch, working with young birds. The training process would have begun when the pigeons were still squabs, impressionable and eager to learn. The initial steps were about establishing the home. A young pigeon would be kept in its loft for a period, becoming intimately familiar with its surroundings. This loft, remember, would be its ultimate destination, its safe haven. Then, the real training began. The bird would be taken a short distance from the loft, perhaps just a few hundred feet, and released. Instinct would guide it back. With each successful return, the distance would gradually increase. First a mile, then 5, then 10, and so on. It was a painstaking process, often taking months, sometimes even over a year, to get a bird truly reliable for long-distance flights. A mainstream historical fact about Roman military training, though not specifically for pigeons, is their emphasis on disciplined repetition. Roman soldiers drilled relentlessly, performing the same maneuvers until they became second nature. This same principle likely applied to the pigeon trainers. Repetition, 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 that's how you build a reliable feathered courier. You want the bird to know, unequivocally, where its true north, its home, lies. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that Roman trainers would sometimes use scents or specific visual cues within the loft to reinforce the home concept. Perhaps a particular type of wood, a unique herb hanging in the loft, or even a specific color painted on the loft entrance. This would have provided additional sensory anchors for the birds, helping them orient themselves. Think of it as leaving a scented candle on your porch to help your dog find its way back home, but on a much grander, more ancient scale. Historians still argue whether the training techniques used by the Romans were systematically documented or passed down orally from master trainer to apprentice. We don't have detailed how to train your imperial pigeon manuals from ancient Rome. The knowledge was likely practical and empirical, refined through generations of trial and error. Was there a secret handshake among pigeon trainers? Probably not, but there certainly would have been a shared understanding of the bird's unique capabilities and quirks. You can almost feel the quiet intensity of these training sessions, the rustle of wings, the gentle cooing, all building towards that moment when a tiny scroll imbued with secrets would take flight. So you've got your meticulously trained, surprisingly intelligent pigeon. But where do these valuable feathered couriers live when they're not off delivering imperial secrets? The answer lies in the pigeon lofts, specialized structures that were far more than just glorified birdhouses. These weren't just random coops. They were carefully designed, secure, and strategically located hubs for the Roman communication network. Imagine a small, well-maintained building, perhaps on the edge of a military camp, within the grounds of an imperial villa, or even nestled discreetly within a bustling city. These lofts were essential for the pigeon's homing instinct to work. A pigeon, remember, returns to its home. This meant the loft had to be a stable, recognizable, and safe environment. They weren't just about housing. They were about creating a reliable base of operations. You'd find individual nesting boxes for each pair of birds, ensuring they had their own space and reducing squabbles. There would be perches for resting and often a dedicated area for feeding and watering. Cleanliness was paramount, both for the health of the birds and to prevent the spread of disease, which could cripple an entire communication line. The design of a Roman pigeon loft would have been surprisingly sophisticated, reflecting a practical understanding of pigeon needs. They often featured secure entry points, perhaps small, one-way traps that allowed birds to enter but not easily exit once inside. This was crucial for security. You wouldn't want a valuable imperial messenger to fly off prematurely, or worse, for a rival to easily snatch a bird before it delivered its message. Think of it as a low-tech, avian security system. A mainstream historical fact. The Romans were master builders, and their understanding of practical architecture extended to everything from grand aqueducts to humble farm structures. A pigeon loft, while not as monumental as a temple, would have been built with the same logical efficiency. They'd used durable materials like stone, brick, or timber, ensuring the structure was resilient against the elements and predators. The exact scale of these imperial lofts is something historians ponder. Were they vast complexes housing hundreds of birds, or smaller, more distributed units? Now for a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the lofts might have been designed to mimic natural cliff faces or caves, environments where wild pigeons often nest. This would have made the artificial structure feel more natural and secure to the birds, enhancing their comfort and reinforcing their sense of home. Imagine a loft with rough-hewn stone walls or a deliberate unevenness in its interior, designed to make a pigeon feel right at home amongst its simulated rocky outcrops. Historians still argue whether the maintenance of these lofts and the care of the pigeons were handled by a dedicated class of state-employed pigeon keepers, perhaps even slaves specifically trained for the task, or if it fell under the purview of broader military or administrative staff. Given the value of these birds and the critical nature of their messages, it's likely there was a specialized role for their care. The life of a Roman pigeon keeper might not sound glamorous, but it was undoubtedly crucial for the effective functioning of the empire's rapid communication system. You can almost hear the gentle murmur of content pigeons, safe within their walls, awaiting their next imperial mission. All right, so a perfumed pigeon, trained to perfection, has landed safely in its meticulously maintained loft. But what happens next? This wasn't just about the bird arriving. It was about the swift and accurate decoding of its message. Imagine a high-stakes scenario, a Roman general desperately awaiting news from the capital. The pigeon's arrival is only the first step. The true value lay in the rapid retrieval and interpretation of the tiny scroll attached to its leg. You see, these messages weren't typically sprawling epics. They were concise, often cryptic, and designed for brevity. The information was usually written on a small piece of papyrus, linen, or even a thin sheet of lead, rolled tightly and secured to the bird's leg with a thread or a delicate metal ring. The very act of unrolling such a tiny missive required nimble fingers and a keen eye. Think of it as unboxing the original, super-secret micromail. The process would involve a dedicated handler, likely a slave or a trusted subordinate, who would immediately retrieve the bird upon its arrival. They'd carefully untie the message, unroll it, and then hand it over to a higher-ranking official, or, if the message was direct, to the emperor, to a trusted aide. The speed of this final step was crucial. What's the point of a fast pigeon if the message then sits unread for hours? A mainstream historical fact here is the Roman reliance on scribes and literacy within their administration. While not everyone was literate, the core of the Roman bureaucracy depended on written communication. Messages, once unrolled, would then be transcribed onto larger scrolls or tablets if they needed to be archived, shared, or further disseminated. This ensured that the fragile original could be safely stored and that the information was accessible to multiple parties. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some scholars suggest that for certain highly sensitive messages, the script used might have been a form of shorthand or a simple cipher, known only to the sender and the intended recipient. This would add another layer of security beyond the perfume, ensuring that even if the bird or message fell into the wrong hands, the content would remain inscrutable to unauthorized eyes. Imagine trying to decipher ancient Roman emojis, but with actual words. This would have required a skilled interpreter on the receiving end, someone intimately familiar with the emperor's or general's specific coding system. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized protocol for receiving and decoding pigeon messages across the vast Roman Empire, or if individual generals and governors established their own ad hoc systems. Was there a specific Magister Columbarius, master of pigeons, in every major city responsible for this final, critical step? Or was it more informal, relying on the local intelligence of whoever was in charge of the pigeon lofts? The details of these receiving offices are scarce, but their existence was vital for the effective functioning of this unique communication channel. You can almost feel the quiet tension in the room as that tiny scroll is unrolled, revealing its ancient secrets. We've traced the journey of the perfumed pigeon from its meticulous training to the decoding of its delicate message. But let's pause for a moment and appreciate the sheer wonder of their performance, speed, and limits. How fast could these feathered marvels actually fly? And what were the geographical boundaries of their airborne postal service? While they weren't exactly supersonic jets, their capabilities were, for the ancient world, remarkably impressive. A well-trained carrier pigeon could achieve speeds of up to 50 miles per hour, around 80 kilometers per hour, under ideal conditions, though average speeds were more likely in the range of 30 to 40 miles per hour, 48 to 64 kilometers per hour. Imagine that. A message leaving Rome could reach a distant provincial capital, say, Pompeii, a mere 140 miles away, in just a few hours. A human messenger on horseback, even traveling at a good pace, would take at least a full day, if not more, to cover the same distance. For truly urgent news, the pigeon was simply unparalleled. The range of these flights was also astonishing. While daily communication might have been over relatively shorter distances, some pigeons were known to cover hundreds of miles. There are accounts, albeit sometimes embellished, of birds flying from distant military outposts back to Rome, traversing mountain ranges and open seas. This made them invaluable for an empire as vast and geographically diverse as Rome's. You can almost feel the wind whistling past their wings, carrying news of battles, harvests, or political intrigue across the sprawling landscape. However, there were inherent limits. Pigeons relied on clear weather. A sudden storm, strong headwinds, or even thick fog could disorient them, delay their arrival, or, sadly, cause them to perish. They also couldn't carry heavy payloads. Their messages had to be tiny scrolls, lightweight and compact. You wouldn't be sending a detailed map or a heavy legal document via pigeon. That was still the domain of the human courier and the slower, but more robust, postal service. Think of it as the express parcel service versus the regular mail. A mainstream historical fact. The Roman Empire's control was heavily reliant on its vast network of roads and the efficient cursus publicus, public postal service. This system, while slower than a pigeon, was designed for bulkier, less urgent, and more secure dispatches, often requiring multiple copies or seals. The pigeon post wasn't a replacement for this. It was a complementary, specialized service. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some sources suggest that Roman generals, when besieging a city, would occasionally release pigeons not just to send messages out, but also to confuse or demoralize the enemy. Imagine seeing pigeons flying into a besieged city. It might suggest that the city had secret allies or a hidden supply line, even if the pigeons were actually empty. It was a subtle form of psychological warfare, leveraging the very mystique of these birds. Historians still argue whether there was a practical limit to how far a single pigeon could reliably fly and return. Was there a network of relay lofts, where message could be transferred from one bird to another to extend its range indefinitely, similar to a Pony Express system? Or was it more common for pigeons to be taken to a distant location by human courier and then released to fly back to their home loft? The logistics of multi-stage pigeon messaging are complex and not fully understood, but the sheer speed and dedication of these birds remain a marvel of ancient communication. You can almost hear the soft flutter of wings, fading into the distance, carrying the weight of empire on their tiny legs. For all their avian brilliance, the Roman pigeon post wasn't the only game in town when it came to communication. In fact, it existed alongside, and often complemented, a fascinating array of other methods, each with its own advantages and drawbacks. These rivals to pigeons, as it were, highlight the Romans' comprehensive approach to information flow, even if some of them strike us as incredibly slow by modern standards. The undisputed heavyweight champion of Roman communication for bulk and official dispatches was the cursus publicus, the imperial postal service. This was a vast network of roads, way stations, mutations for changing horses, mansions for overnight stays, and train couriers. Imagine a kind of ancient FedEx, but with horses and wagons instead of trucks and planes. Messages and goods could travel hundreds of miles a day, though the journey was arduous and often took many days or even weeks for distant provinces. This system was robust and reliable for heavy loads and official decrees, but it was inherently a land-based and therefore slower operation. It's a mainstream historical fact that this postal service was crucial for the administration of the vast Roman Empire. Then there were the more specialized methods. For short-distance signaling, the Romans famously used beacons and signal fires. Imagine a chain of hilltop watchtowers, each ready to light a fire at night or send up a smoke signal by day to alert the next tower in line. This could transmit a very simple message, enemy sighted or victory, incredibly quickly across dozens of miles. However, it was limited to prearranged messages, couldn't convey complex information, and was completely dependent on good visibility. You certainly couldn't send a perfumed poem this way. Another method, for local military communication or urgent calls for reinforcements, involve horn blasts or drum signals. These were effective for directing troops on a battlefield or communicating within a siege camp, but their range was very limited and their message content even more so. It was a more immediate, visceral form of communication, but certainly not for whispering imperial secrets. Think of it as the original ping or alert system. Now for a quirky tidbit. There are scattered references to the Romans using heliographs, devices that use polished shields or mirrors to reflect sunlight and send messages in a kind of ancient Morse code. This would have been even more weather-dependent than signal fires, requiring bright, clear days and a direct line of sight. Imagine a Roman legionary trying to send an SOS signal with a glinting shield, hoping someone miles away was looking in precisely the right direction. It makes you appreciate how much simpler it was to just tie a scroll to a bird's leg. Historians still argue whether the cursus publicus and the pigeon post were distinct, separate services, or if they occasionally integrated, with pigeons being used to carry urgent updates to a cursus publicus station for onward transmission by land. Was there a seamless handover, or did they operate in parallel, each serving its specific communication niche? The precise hierarchy and interaction of these ancient communication technologies are not entirely clear, but what is evident is the Romans' relentless pursuit of effective ways to bind their enormous empire together with the sinews of information. They understood that knowledge was power, and swift knowledge was even greater. We spent some time appreciating the mechanics of the perfumed pigeon post, but let's delve deeper into the olfactory aspect of this unique communication method. Why perfume? What was the symbolic significance of these specific scents on imperial messages? It wasn't just a whimsical flourish. It added layers of meaning, authentication, and even a touch of imperial mystique to each airborne dispatch. In ancient Rome, perfumes and aromatic oils were far more than mere cosmetics. They were imbued with cultural, religious, and social significance. Frankincense and myrrh, for instance, were precious resins from the East, often used in religious ceremonies and associated with divinity and wealth. Rosewater, a common scent, might evoke beauty and luxury. To apply such a scent to a message from the emperor was to immediately elevate its status. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a sensory experience, a tangible connection to the distant imperial court. Think of it as the ultimate luxury stationery, but for pigeons. The scent could act as an immediate identifier and authenticator. Imagine receiving a message. Before you even unroll the tiny scroll, the delicate aroma hits you. If you're expecting a communication from, say, Emperor Hadrian, and you know he favors a particular blend of cypress and cedar, then the distinct whiff of that scent would immediately signal the message's genuine imperial origin. In a world rampant with forgeries and impersonations, this was a surprisingly effective and low-tech security measure. It's a mainstream historical fact that Romans used seals for authentication, but scent added another, more ephemeral layer. Furthermore, the perfume could convey a subtle, non-verbal message. A strong, musky scent might indicate a serious or urgent dispatch, while a lighter, floral aroma could suggest a more personal or diplomatic communication. It was a kind of ancient, emotional shorthand, a way to set the tone of the message even before a single word was read. You can almost imagine the distinct scent profiles of different emperors or their trusted advisors, each leaving an aromatic calling card on their urgent missives. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that specific scents might have been tied to particular types of news. For instance, a message signaling a military victory might be scented with laurel, traditionally associated with triumph, while a dispatch concerning a public holiday might carry the festive aroma of citrus. This would have added a poetic, almost ritualistic dimension to the communication, turning a mere message into a multi-sensory event. It's like your email inbox having different notification sounds for different senders, but infinitely more elegant. Historians still argue whether the choice of specific perfumes was a formal, codified system, with a fixed lexicon of scents for different message types, or if it was more ad hoc, reflecting the personal preferences of the sender and the availability of luxurious ingredients. Were there perfumers specifically employed by the imperial court to create these communication-specific aromas? We don't have a detailed Roman scent code textbook, but the practice itself speaks volumes about the Romans' ingenuity and their appreciation for the power of sensory details, even in the most practical aspects of governance. You can almost catch a faint, ethereal whiff of ancient history, carried on the wings of time. The life of an imperial pigeon wasn't all luxury lofts and fragrant messages. These brave little birds faced a surprising number of hazards on their journeys across the vast Roman Empire. Imagine being a tiny speck against the enormous sky, carrying a secret of state, and suddenly a shadow falls over you that isn't a cloud. One of the most obvious threats was predators. Hawks, falcons, and eagles were common throughout the Roman world, and a plump, slow-moving pigeon carrying a message would have been a tempting target. You can almost picture a dramatic aerial chase, the pigeon desperately trying to outmaneuver its winged assailant. The trainers undoubtedly tried to minimize this risk, perhaps by releasing birds at times of day when predators were less active, or by flying them in groups. Those solitary journeys were likely more common for urgent dispatches. Beyond birds of prey, there were also human threats. While generally well regarded, a pigeon carrying a message could fall into the wrong hands. An enemy scout, a curious farmer, or even a mischievous child might capture a bird. If the message was discovered, especially if it wasn't encrypted, it could compromise imperial plans or reveal sensitive information. This is why the perfumed aspect and potential ciphers were so crucial, adding layers of security to mitigate such risks. It's a mainstream historical fact that espionage and intelligence gathering were vital components of Roman warfare and politics. Then there was the weather. As we touched upon earlier, a sudden change in conditions could be disastrous. Strong winds could blow a pigeon off course, sending it hundreds of miles in the wrong direction. Heavy rain could soak its feathers, making flight difficult or impossible. A sudden cold snap could lead to hypothermia, especially for a bird flying over mountainous regions. Imagine navigating by instinct through a blinding rainstorm. It's a testament to their resilience that so many made it. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources hint at the possibility of pigeon spies, enemy agents who might try to infiltrate Roman pigeon lofts to replace birds with their own, or to capture imperial pigeons and then release them with false messages. While likely rare and difficult to execute, the very idea suggests the high value placed on these communication lines and the lengths to which people would go for intelligence. Imagine someone trying to sneak into a pigeon loft, try to look inconspicuous while surrounded by hundreds of cooing birds. Historians still argue whether the Romans had specific countermeasures in place to protect their pigeon fleet, beyond just careful handling and secure lofts. Did they have guards posted at key release points? Were pigeons fitted with tiny bells or noisemakers to deter predators, even at the risk of alerting humans? The records are sparse, but the very existence of such a vital communication system implies a constant awareness of the dangers these small, important messengers faced. Each arrival was a small victory, a testament to the bird's tenacity and the ingenuity of its handlers. Given all the risks these little feathered couriers faced, it's clear that the imperial courier life wasn't just about the pigeons themselves, but also about the dedicated individuals who managed them. These were the unsung heroes of the Roman pigeon post, the handlers, trainers, and loft keepers whose daily routines revolved around the health, well-being, and readiness of these vital birds. You can almost imagine their quiet, patient work, far from the clamor of the legions or the intrigue of the Senate. Their day would likely begin at dawn, checking on the birds, ensuring they had fresh water and grain. A pigeon's diet was crucial. A well-fed bird was a strong, reliable flyer. They'd meticulously inspect each bird for any signs of illness or injury, as a sick pigeon was not only a liability, but could also spread disease through the entire loft. It was a task that required keen observation and a gentle touch, qualities often overlooked in historical accounts focusing on grander affairs. Training would have been an ongoing process, not just for new squabs, but also to keep experienced birds sharp. This might involve regular short flights, conditioning exercises, and perhaps even practicing releases from different locations to ensure the birds were adaptable. Imagine the quiet dedication. A handler carefully untying a tiny message from a pigeon's leg, his brow furrowed in concentration, knowing the fate of a distant legion might rest on the timely delivery of that small scroll. A mainstream historical fact: Roman society, while hierarchical, often valued specialized skills, regardless of social status. Whether these handlers were slaves, freedmen, or even low-ranking soldiers, their expertise in avian care and communication would have been highly prized. They weren't just servants, they were experts in a vital field. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some sources hint that handlers might have used subtle personal cues to bond with their birds, perhaps a particular whistle, a unique call, or even a specific way of offering food. This would foster a level of trust between human and animal, potentially making the birds more responsive and reliable. It's a lovely thought that amidst the grandeur of Rome, there were these quiet, intimate relationships between man and bird, built on routine and mutual understanding. You might even chuckle imagining a stern Roman official having a surprisingly tender side when interacting with his feather charges. Historians still argue whether these pigeon handlers had a specific military or civilian designation. Were they part of the broader cursus publicus infrastructure, or did they operate as an entirely separate, specialized unit under direct imperial command? The organizational structure of this niche communication service remains somewhat elusive. What is clear, however, is that without their constant vigilance and dedication, the Roman perfumed pigeon post would have been little more than a fleeting curiosity. They were the silent, essential gears in this unique ancient machine of communication. While our focus tonight has been on Rome's perfumed pigeons, it's fascinating to note that the idea of using birds for communication wasn't exclusive to the Romans. The concept of pigeon communication spread far beyond the Tiber, influencing and being adopted by other ancient empires and civilizations across the globe. It's a testament to the effectiveness and intuitive nature of this method that it found resonance in so many different cultures. One of the earliest and most well-documented uses of carrier pigeons predates Rome significantly: the ancient Egyptians. They used pigeons not just for sending messages, but also for purposes like recording the results of important races or even carrying news of the Nile's annual flooding, a vital piece of information for their agricultural society. Imagine a pharaoh awaiting news from a distant granary, with the fate of his kingdom's food supply riding on the wings of a small bird. This extensive use in Egypt is a mainstream historical fact, showing a long lineage for avian messengers. Further east, the Persian Empire also famously employed carrier pigeons. Cyrus the Great, a visionary leader, is often credited with establishing an organized pigeon post system to maintain control over his vast empire. Messages would fly between his royal palaces and distant satrapies, ensuring that news and orders traveled swiftly. This system, while perhaps not involving perfume, certainly relied on the same fundamental homing instinct and meticulous training that the Romans would later refine. Even in parts of ancient China, there are accounts of pigeons being used for military communication and for sending news between distant provinces. While detailed records are scarce, the very idea of a flying post seems to have been a universal innovation, springing up independently or spreading through cultural exchange across trade routes like the Silk Road. You can almost see the pigeons as tiny, feathered threads, weaving together the fabric of ancient civilizations. Now for a quirky tidbit. During sieges, some ancient commanders, including those in the Near East, would occasionally tie small, incendiary devices to pigeons, hoping they would fly into enemy fortifications and start fires. Thankfully, this practice was likely rare and often ineffective, but it speaks to the creative, if sometimes destructive, ways humans try to leverage these birds. Imagine a pigeon being given a truly flaming dispatch, a far cry from the subtle aroma of rosewater. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of carrier pigeons across different ancient civilizations was due to independent invention, a natural discovery of the bird abilities, or if the technology and methods disseminated through trade and conquest. Did Roman pigeon handlers learn from Egyptian techniques, or did they develop their methods in parallel? The exact lines of influence are hard to trace, but the shared thread of feathered communication across millennia highlights a universal human need for faster, more efficient ways to connect across distance. Like all ingenious technologies, the widespread use of the perfumed pigeon post, and indeed pigeon messaging in general, eventually saw a gradual decline. It wasn't an abrupt end, but rather a slow fading as new, more efficient, and often more robust communication methods emerged over centuries. The humble pigeon, once an imperial courier, found its role diminishing as human ingenuity progressed. The primary factor in its decline was the continuous improvement of land-based postal systems. As roads became more established, and as methods for changing horses and organizing relays became more refined, human couriers, though never as fast as a direct pigeon flight, became increasingly reliable for transporting larger volumes of information. The cursus publicus in Rome, for example, continued to evolve, becoming more widespread and efficient, capable of handling everything from heavy official documents to private correspondence. This sustained improvement in land routes is a mainstream historical fact that slowly chipped away at the pigeon's niche. Another significant development was the increasing sophistication of human literacy and administrative systems. As more people learned to read and write, and as bureaucratic processes became more complex, the need for tiny, cryptic pigeon messages gave way to a demand for detailed reports, multi-page decrees, and comprehensive accounts. A pigeon simply couldn't carry that kind of information. Imagine trying to send a detailed tax ledger via bird. You'd need an entire flock just for one financial quarter. The rise of larger, more centralized states with improved infrastructure also contributed. Empires like the Byzantine Empire, which succeeded Rome in the East, continued to refine postal systems, often incorporating elements from both the Roman and Persian models, but with a greater emphasis on ground-based reliability for sustained communication across their vast territories. Now for a quirky tidbit. During the Middle Ages, while formal pigeon post declined for official state business, it enjoyed a resurgence in certain niche applications, such as stock market reporting between European cities or for transmitting news during religious pilgrimages. Merchants, ever pragmatic, saw the value in a quick, if informal, delivery of crucial financial data, even if emperors no longer relied on scented birds. It was a brief, almost nostalgic revival of the feathered messenger, showing its enduring utility in specific contexts. Historians still argue whether the decline was truly due to technological obsolescence, or if it was also influenced by changing political structures and the decentralization of power in the post-Roman era. Did the breakdown of the vast Roman infrastructure make the upkeep of specialized pigeon lofts too difficult, leading to a natural decline in their use? Or did the inherent limitations of pigeons simply become too great as the complexity of governance increased? Whatever the precise blend of factors, the age of the primary imperial pigeon courier slowly drew to a close, paving the way for the next chapter in human communication. The skies, once dotted with imperial messengers, became a little less crowded with feathered secrets. Despite their eventual decline in prominence, the influence and enduring legacy of pigeons in communication history are undeniable. They represent a crucial stepping stone in humanity's relentless quest for faster, more reliable ways to transmit information across distances. Even in our hyper-connected digital age, the humble pigeon reminds us of the ingenious solutions our ancestors devised with the technology available to them. The very concept of a rapid, point-to-point delivery system owes a debt to the pigeon. Before postal services and telegraphs, the idea that a message could travel independently through the air without the constant direct guidance of a human was revolutionary. It laid the groundwork for future innovations in communication, demonstrating the power of dedicated networks and specialized carriers. You could say pigeons were the original proof of concept for aerial delivery. Their role in military intelligence, particularly, left an indelible mark. From ancient sieges to the world wars, yes, pigeons were still used in World War I and World War II for critical messages when other systems failed. These birds proved their resilience and reliability under extreme pressure. They were the ultimate low-tech, high-impact solution when wires were cut or radios were jammed. It's a mainstream historical fact that pigeons were decorated for bravery in 20th century conflicts, a testament to their enduring utility long after the Roman Empire faded. Now for a quirky tidbit. The phrase pigeonholed, meaning to classify or defer something, actually has its origins in the individual compartments or pigeonholes within the lofts where these birds were kept. It's a linguistic legacy that connects our modern organizational habits back to the ancient practice of avian communication. So, next time you pigeonhole a document, you can thank a Roman loft keeper. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of knowing messages could literally fly was more significant than the practical benefits. Did it foster a greater sense of connection and control across the vast empire? Simply because news could arrive so quickly? The intangible feeling of proximity and responsiveness enabled by these birds might have been as important as the tangible information they carried. Even today, in a world dominated by fiber optics and satellite dishes, the story of the perfumed pigeons serves as a charming and fascinating reminder of how innovation, observation, and a bit of ingenuity can overcome immense logistical challenges. They were more than just birds. They were living embodiments of human aspiration, carrying whispers of history on fragrant wings, connecting distant lands, and shaping the flow of information in ways we are still unraveling. As our journey through the ancient Roman pigeon post comes to a close, let's allow our minds to gently drift, much like those perfumed messengers once soared through the twilight skies. We've explored the intricate world of their training, the security of their lofts, and the subtle power of their scented secrets. Now, as the day winds down, let the echoes of their wing beats soothe you. Imagine the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of papyrus as a message is unrolled, the faint, lingering scent of myrrh or frankincense filling the air, a silent whisper from centuries past. Picture the quiet dedication of the pigeon handlers, their hands gentle as they tended to their feathered charges, knowing the weight of empires rested, however briefly, on tiny legs. It's a story of ingenuity born from necessity, of a world that relied on instinct and natural marvels long before microchips and satellites. The Roman pigeons, with their earnest flights and fragrant cargo, were more than just birds. They were silent witnesses to history, carrying news of triumphs and tribulations, of love and war, across the vast tapestry of the ancient world. Their legacy is not just in the historical records, but in the enduring fascination we hold for the simple, yet profound, ways humans have always sought to connect across distance. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let the image of a calm, steady pigeon finding its way home be a comforting thought. Its journey completed, its message delivered, its purpose fulfilled. There's a profound peace in that simple cycle. All the urgency, all the intrigue, now recedes, leaving only the gentle hum of history. Allow your breath to deepen, slowing with each passing moment. The distant calls of ancient Rome fade into a soft, murmuring quiet. The scents, the sounds, the very notion of a message on a wing, let it all blend into the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. The past is vast, but tonight it's a calm, quiet place to rest. Feel the weight of the day lift, replaced by a deep sense of calm. The stories have been told, the journey complete. There's nothing left to do but simply be.